Welcome to the Microsoft Security Insights Show. The show streams live every Wednesday on YouTube, Twitch, LinkedIn, and Twitter, and streamed directly into your ear the following Friday across all popular podcast networks. Hosted by Edward Walton, Andrea Fisher, Rod Trent, and Brody Castle, the Microsoft Security Insights Show provides information, news, and tips on Microsoft security solutions.
Recorded May 31st, 2023. Good afternoon, Andrea. Good afternoon, Ed. How are you doing?
Good afternoon, friends.
Howdy. Yeah, we're doing a little different. We didn't throw our guests into the green room where they find out there's actually no beer and no snacks and no entertainment. It's purgatory. So we have the pleasure of having Mr. Fisher as a guest as well as a co-host today. No relation to Andrew, but I'm sure they'll get to that. But how you doing, Andrew? It was something you and I were yakking about before, and it was some announcement I didn't see. So
yeah, I'm good. Happened? Finally over my jet lag. Rested during the weekend. Got dragged to see Little Mermaid, which, by the way, not terrible. Let's see what else exciting. I don't know. I know you went to a barbecue.
You went to a barbecue?
You went to a barbecue.
Oh, yeah. I went to a barbecue. Yeah, I went to 2 barbecues. Probably why I'm still not feeling good. I ate too much red meat. I am just not right. Yeah, not too much on my part. I took Friday off, was told to take Friday off, and then Monday was off, and I overindulged to the point where I confessed to Andrew. I said, I'm going to abstain no more this week. And then again, I'm back on the sauce. I'm back on the sauce. I can't help myself. Nothing special on my part. Obviously, I'm moving about, so I'm not actually in my home office where I generally do my podcast. I had to travel because I have a meeting with a bunch of my buddies for my nonprofit and this big race we got coming up here. So we're planning that, but nothing exciting on my side. A little bit of work, some lab stuff. Finally got a license for my Palo Alto that Matt Egan gave me. So came without a license, but I finally got a license through a hookup. And what else am I doing? Nothing. Doing a lot of pricing around the things that we cover. Weather's good. Chilling. That's about it. Nothing else. But Andrew, you and I were yik-yakking before we went live. Is there something you could talk about, some announcement?
Well, having talked with Andrea before and dealing with these sorts of things that come up with customers quite frequently, I wanted to make sure everybody was aware of the configuration analyzer in Microsoft Defender for Office 365.
The configuration analyzer?
Sir, that is one of the best built and least well-known, least utilized tools we've got in Defender for Office 365. It looks at how you've got things set up and tells you where you can do better.
Hey, so okay. I'm just saying hello to our people and our viewers. Let's start. Let's back up a little bit and let's say who is Ed Fisher. First off,
God.
For those
doesn't
of you
know
who
Ed
do
Fisher?
Not know, Edward said that we are not related, but we actually think that we are twins separated at birth because Ed and I were born on the same day, same year. Same last name. Somehow there's got to be a connection here.
Indeed. Almost the same time, I think.
Yeah. So, and clearly, we look alike. So that's not hard to believe. So.
Oh, she got all the looks. I got all the grumpiness.
Is that what it is? Oh, okay.
That is exactly what it is.
So
I've known Ed for at least 9 or 10 years. We were both TSs together in the South OU. But Ed has done a bunch of changes since then. You went over to the compliance side, or no, the team side, right?
So I've done, I think at last count, it was 11 different roles in 12 years. All of them attached to Office 365 in some way. Current, with no plans on changing, role is as a principal product manager for Microsoft Defender for Office 365. So I'm one of a large team of product managers. There are people who own features. There are people who own customer relationships. I'm on the customer experience engineering side. So I help customers mostly focused on S500s, but not strictly limited to that, who are interested in evaluating Defender for Office 365, deploying Defender for Office 365, both with engineering issues, feature understandings, feature requests, that sort of thing.
So 11 roles, 12 years. I have not known you as long as Andrea, but I've known of you in my brief period of time here. So I finally got to meet you in Redmond earlier this year.
I think that was our first in real life meeting after years of, the before times.
Yeah. Email here, text here, Ed Fisher. Like, never met the guy. But so back to that tool you were talking about. Is it similar to, or is it an evolution of Orca?
So it is very much inspired by using a lot of the same capability as Orca. The big difference, of course, being that Orca is a self-contained tool. You can download it from GitHub. You can run it. It exports a very nice HTML file. We really still like to use Orca when we want a customer to show us their configuration in a nice, neat file that they can attach to an email and send to us, or put up on OneDrive and share with us. Orca is, as a GitHub project, it is open source. One of my colleagues in CXE, Cam Murray, still very much involved in helping to maintain it. In fact, there's some new feature capability that we're testing currently. We ought to see that in a release in the next day or two. Configuration Analyzer does a lot of the same things, but it's built right into the administrative portal. And there are a number of security roles that can run Configuration Analyzer, and it provides you a GUI evaluation with recommendations built right into the security portal so that you can see, and if you have the appropriate rights, implement changes right there in the system. While you can take screenshots and do some other things with it, it's really more for the admin to be looking at the console and working with it right there, where Orca is the very nice, here's an output file I can send to somebody.
So that's a great question that we see in the window. Somebody's like, what is Orca? Can somebody explain what that is?
Sure. So Orca is the Office 365 Recommended Configuration Analyzer. This is a GitHub project that is, well, it's maintained on GitHub, obviously. Cam Murray, one of my colleagues, I mentioned his name earlier, developed this tool as a great way to have customers export their configurations in a very nice, easy to read HTML file format to help support engineers, PMs, other people involved with helping the customer to take a look at the configuration. Obviously, you could run several PowerShell commands and export a bunch of text, and well, Orca is doing exactly that. But then Orca takes it and formats it into an HTML report, color codes it based on things that are good, things that could use improvement, things that are recommendations or that are informational. Yes, and somebody just typed in the long link that will get you to Orca. It's a tool anybody can download and run. We do recommend that if you're going to use it, you check back often. And again, there should be a new version shipping in the next few days. We're in the process of testing some things, even as early as this morning.
Yeah, other than the one that's obviously Git, the one that you talked about at the very beginning, the 365 Configuration Analyzer, we're going to assume that this is free, right? Built into the product.
It is built into the administrative console, global admins, security admins, org management, security readers. There are a couple of other RBAC roles that have access to it. Obviously, if you were in a reader role, it will only give you the outputs. If you're in an admin role, you can take those outputs and click the easy button to deploy the changes. Malik was asking about an open source link. So that link that was pasted above is to GitHub. So you can download the source, you can download the make files, everything's right there.
It sounds like you're still doing the things as far as your role that I saw them. Well, you've had 12 roles, 11 years, or vice versa. Have you always been a Microsoft Defender for Office, even before the name, that type of guy?
Well, so before I joined Microsoft, I was a BPOS customer, and then joined Microsoft.
BPOS was Office 365 before it was Office 365.
I don't know how far back everybody goes. So yeah, back in the very, very old days, Business Productivity Online Services was our first hosted capabilities. And we had Exchange, we had SharePoint. Office 365 was announced, released, hit general availability the same day I started with Microsoft back in 2011. So I've always been with Office 365. I was a delivery consultant, and I was a delivery architect. Then I switched over to the dark side and became a technology solutions professional. That's when Andrea and I met. I did that for a while, and that was over all of Office 365. So throughout all that time, Forefront Online Protection for Exchange, and then Exchange Online Protection, and then Microsoft Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection, which was the previous name to MDO. Always been an email person. I mean, going way back to Exchange 4.0. So I've always had something to do with email, not always Microsoft email. There's some MHS, there was some Lotus Notes. Sorry, the scars run deep. So yeah, I've worked with MDO a lot, and even in my role supporting the Teams product group when I was a COE architect, Teams protections that are built into MDO, and then when I came back to be a security TS, but I recently made the change over to the product group, and I'm focusing strictly on Microsoft Defender for Office 365.
Your name, now that you get a little bit of your history, I maybe encountered you through either a gentleman by the name of Raymond Bussey, Raybon Bussey, and Steve Adams. They used to call him the Windows guy or the device guy. Remember those two?
I recognize the names.
Yeah. Are you a Ranger? Back in the day, were you an Exchange Ranger?
I was never an Exchange Ranger. I was an Office 365 Ranger. I was a SharePoint Ranger. I'm an MDO Ranger, which probably helped me get the current role that I'm in now. But no, I was never an Exchange Ranger. I'm not that good.
Oh, okay.
And
so
again,
for those,
people who don't know what a Ranger is,
tell them, Ed, what is a Ranger?
I'll let you do it, Edward. You brought it up.
A Ranger is a badass in a very specific product. So if you had the designation Exchange Ranger or any of those type of Rangers behind you, think about the atypical, special forces. You drop someone in to fix your problems, especially they never had a BPOS Ranger. it didn't go that long, right? But it is a very distinguished designation. Some people would say is right in line with MVP, Microsoft Most Valuable Professional, something like that. Most Valuable Professional. And so, I don't know many. And they usually have separate conferences for Ranger conferences. I remember that, right? You could go. So, but that was back in the day of Tech Ed and some of those old things. So you're a PM in the MDO group. Now I know who to bother now. Now I know exactly who to bother when things come up.
There's a link, and you can put in a request, and we'll triage it accordingly.
What do you do every day? I know what a P is, a M is, and I know what Office 365 is, but what do you do?
So as a product manager, you are the bridge between like engineering devs and something, whether that is the field or customers specifically. I'm a part of the customer experience engineering group. So we are much more focused on the breadth of the product with customers. Contrast that to a feature PM who is a product manager who owns a very particular aspect of the product. So perhaps attack simulation training or post-breach capabilities or threat hunting, or name a feature. There's a PM that owns that feature. And behind that PM, there are a number of devs who are actually writing the code based on what the product manager is providing guidance into what is to be focused on in this iteration of this semester. In front of the product or the feature PMs, the CXE PMs are more that interaction with the customer. So there are pre-intent and there are post-intent. And pre-intent, which is the side I sit on, is very much the customer facing to assist with customers who are interested in the product, are curious about the product, may want to evaluate the product, may have already gone through and evaluated the product and had specific questions about functionality. Or perhaps we're looking for a feature or a capability that Maybe we do it, but they don't know where it is. Or maybe we don't do it, but we are very interested in learning what customers want from the product. I mean, that's how the product evolves. People don't just come up with ideas in a closed room and hope that folks are going to like it. It's very much, what do customers want? What are they asking for? What do they like? What do they not like? What are they using? What are they not using, to help prioritize where development goes? So part of my role is leading proofs of concept, which we have as a proof of concept as a service, which for larger customers who have interest and intent in deploying Defender for Office 365, but want kind of a guided environment to go through, several days worth of instruction and demonstration, followed by an environment that they can red team and throw things at and do whatever they want to do. Some of that is meeting with customers to, again, solicit direct feedback. What do you like? What do you not like? What do you want to see in the next version of the product? What do you think about how we're doing this? Or let's show you what's an idea. Maybe it's a wire map. Maybe it's a very early alpha. But to show security admins, email admins, security teams, what we're looking at doing to gain feedback on are we heading in the right direction? Is this meeting a need? Sometimes it's feature gaps. Not all feature gaps will be closed. There are some things that some customers want that is just not a direction we're going to go, or perhaps it is, but in the on-premises deployment as opposed to the cloud deployment. But a lot of the times it can also be technical escalations. Somebody's got a question and their technical specialist, their account team don't know the answer, can't find the answer. So they're, I'm the phone a friend for several hundred people in the organization.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like email is just ubiquitous now. It's like everywhere, but it still sounds like your team is innovating and taking feedback, to improve the product. Is it within MDO? How much innovation is it to fix a problem or to introduce a feature? Because one thing I keep hearing customers like, well, Microsoft doesn't have a DMARC tool, right? And I'm like, yeah, but what's the value of having a DMARC tool inside of it? How do you go about? I know feedback is one part of it, but it does sound like we got still innovating. So are you more innovative on the security side, or are you more innovative on the collaboration side? It sounds like you're focused on the security side for the most part.
Well, I am focused on the security side, but there's a lot of blending or blurred lines between the security and the collaboration. That the DMARC, I'm going to use that. I know you just pulled that kind of out of random, but that's a really great example because it's one of the things that there's a lot of different viewpoints on, and there's a lot of interest in what we're doing. DMARC is obviously a very important security tool to help prevent spoofing, impersonation. We have used DMARC evaluation for years, and admins can make settings based on what an incoming email does in terms of passes DMARC, doesn't pass DMARC, what do you want to do? We originally quarantined everything, even if it was on a reject, because sadly, DMARC is still one of those technologies that's not very well implemented by domain admins. And if we went reject with everything, we saw a very high rate of false positives because the sending domains DMARC policy said reject it, but it was actually legitimate mail. Mm-hmm. As customers have gotten better with DMARC, as domain admins have gotten better with setting their records and identifying their senders or implementing DKIM, that hasn't been as big an issue. So, if it says reject, we'll reject it. If it says quarantine, we'll quarantine it. But we look at DMARC and have for years. We started sending out DMARC reports when the MX record points to us for delivery. We won't send a DMARC report if you've got a third-party service in front of us or if you're routing to on-prem before it gets to us. But if the mail comes direct to us, we will send out DMARC reports to domain admins when they have an RUA or an RUF address. Evaluating DMARC reporting is something that we opted to go with a partner to provide. So if you're not aware, Valimail is a Microsoft 365 partner, And they will, for all Office 365 customers, provide aggregate DMARC services for customers of Office 365 at no charge. So we chose to have a third party do that instead of doing it ourselves. They offer aggregate at no charge for any Office 365 customer. They do offer forensic services for an additional charge if you are one who actually wants the full forensics that are in there. Mm-hmm. We are currently looking at whether or not we want to bring those capabilities in-house as part of our own first party offerings in what would probably be MDO Plan 2. So RUA and RUF, aggregate versus forensic. A lot of customers have RUA entries in their DMARC policy, but have very weak DMARC policies, like a P equals none and no statement on their subdomains, or they have a P equal quarantine, but a % of 10. So it's very interesting to see how customers are dipping their toes into the pool. Some customers do have RUF records added, but when we ask them, they're not actually doing anything with it because they get all of these XML files and it goes into some shared mailbox and it's never looked at again. So one of the things that the CXC group is doing is in talking to customers who have an interest in DMARC, or customers are brought to us by account teams and said, hey, our customer wants DMARC. We need to make sure we know which side of DMARC do they want. Do they want us to send reports? Do they want us to provide services? And if they do want us to provide services like Valley Mail or DMARC-In or Proofpoint or others provide, then we are very interested in meeting with them to see exactly what kind of features and capabilities they're looking for. And we actively track this. So in our CRM product, feature requests are things that we enter. We, the customer, the number of seats, in other words, how big the customer is. Obviously, a very large customer will have more impact than a smaller customer in terms of system load. Also, if it's something that they're looking for to make a purchasing decision. I mean, we are a business, so the larger the customer, the more influence it may have, but that's definitely not the only factor involved. But we track and we allocate, and then as we're going through and triaging, what are the devs going to work on this quarter, this half year? Does it need to slide to a quarter? Does it need to go on the we'll get to it in the backlog, but we haven't decided to assign a time and allocate dev hours to it yet or not. But we meet with the various feature PMs weekly or bi-weekly, depending upon which feature it is, to review all of the customer interests and requests. And we help shuffle and balance that. So as they go into their planning for their next development sprints, the features that are worked on are the features that have the strongest demand from customers. But we are very interested in bringing DMARC capabilities in-house. And so if we've got feedback from any of the audience here, put it in the chat and I'll reach out to you. We'll be interested in hearing what you're after.
Or also, anybody wants to pop it on a Discord, we can hand it over to Ed at a later date. And
that Ed?
Yes, Ed Fisher, not Edward. Ed Fisher. Do y'all look at are the public preview customers, the M365 public preview customers? Do you interface with them?
So typically, if a customer is going into preview, they have made the decision to buy. So part of the same CXC group, but more focused on the post-intent side. So again, within CXC, there are two of us on pre-intent, and there's, I believe, 6 or 7 in post-intent. But we both go back and forth on the lines. It really depends upon the immediate demand.
That sounds all well and good with all the features and post and pre, but I'll ask you the $1 million question. Is it in GovCloud? Is it in M365, GCC High? Because it seems to be a parity.
Without speaking officially or authoritatively for GCC and GCC High, the North Star is feature parity across all features. But we may have all of the code ready to go, and until the JAB goes through and approves it, we can't light it up. And we don't control that accreditation process. That's NIST and DHS and DISA and a couple of other organizations that go through. So there's nothing that we're putting in to commercial multi-tenant that we don't have the expectation of making available to GCC and GCC High. But if they see something that they want to spend more time on, or they see something that doesn't meet what they're expecting or looking for, ultimately it's up to them to decide what things are going to get that L4, L5 designation before we turn it on.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's government customers or agencies are always saying, well, when are we going to get it? You know, with Office 365, I think sometimes, MDO, people maybe, I won't say take it for granted, but take it for, they assume that lighting it up automatically deploys the majority of the security configurations. From the time you have completed your migration from whatever you came from, is it gotten better about baseline security controls that are just out of the box and inherent to the system without having to do too much? Because sometimes customers will get, especially when they come from on-premise and they had an external sanitation point, or they came from a competitor in front of their email, Proofpoint, Mimecast, whomever else may be, and they're trying to translate the rules. Or is the product team getting better just out of the box things that are automatically deployed that won't get you a pink slip? Right?
It's a great question, and it's a question that's got some nuance to it. For any product on any technology, if you are leaving one provider and moving to another provider, that is a migration, and migrations are not seamless. They're not push the easy button, flip the switch, and you're done. Messaging hygiene, very much so more than others, because typically if a customer's been on, as you said, a Proofpoint or a Mimecast or a Message Labs or Ironport, those systems have years of built up institutional knowledge. Their allow lists, their block lists, there may be entries on there that predate any of the current employees and for which there is no history, but it was there and they want to bring it over, copy paste. Also, those products, not only in how they do things, but in even some of the vocabulary, the way they call things, it's not an apples to apples with us. It's an apples to oranges. And if your goal is to copy and paste apples to apples, that's going to be a challenge. But if your goal is to have, a delicious and very effective fruit snack, we can absolutely get you there. But it is not as simple as export config, import config, and done. Nor is it as simple as update your MX record and done. We have, because customers have requested, if not an easy button, something as close to an easy button as they can get, added some things to the service in the past several months that do help facilitate that. There are some, I'm trying to come up with a good descriptive word. There are some pre-configured policies that are in the system, so that if you want to just say, what are Microsoft's recommended starting points for a standard policy, you can push that button and you're going to get the standard policy. Or what are Microsoft's recommendations for a tighter, more secure configuration, or strict policy? You push that button and you're going to get the strict policy. But you do have to push those buttons, and you do have to understand that the standard and the strict policies for smaller companies may do everything they want to do. But for the companies that have, a full-time security staff, a full-time messaging staff, enterprises who are always going to have exceptions and special cases, those are starting points, and you are going to need to spend some time tuning them. If you do nothing, you're getting the out-of-the-box configuration. And for years, we have taken the stance that we would rather you opt into blocking stuff than have a whole bunch of false positives that cause you headaches. So the out-of-the-box configuration is extremely lightweight. Nobody should be in the out-of-the-box. Standard and strict are both very good starting points for either standard. I'm a little more open. There may be more false negatives. Or strict. I'm a little tighter wound. I'm a little more secure, but there may be false positives. But they're going to require some tuning. And again, if you're coming from another system into our system, it's less important to worry about, well, I did it in Ironport. I want to do exactly that in MDO. It should be, what is the net result? What am I trying to accomplish? And then work with us either through the adoption team or our customer success unit or our documentation to look at what the end goal is rather than, oh, I want to drive down this road. Well, maybe that's not the best road to get you where you want to go. We've got a different road, different scenery, but it's going to get you there, and it's going to get you there very well and very securely. And to circle back to that configuration analyzer that I was talking about, that's built around that standard and that strict, so that if you start with an out-of-the-box standard policy and then you want to see where you might tighten things up, you can run the configuration analyzer and look at the standard or look at the strict and say, yeah, I like the idea. Let me turn that knob up and move that slider over and turn that thing on, or strict.
Twin Heat, do you want to show it for our viewers?
I would
bring it on up.
Love to show it. Let me present a screen. And
for our audio people only, we will try to do our best to narrate along. But I do want you to see, Edward, that Noodle thinks I'm going to win our death match.
Okay, so you guys tell me, since I had to minimize what I was seeing, are you seeing the Microsoft 365 Defender screen?
Yes.
Excellent. So I'm not showing you my solitaire game on the other monitor, the Microsoft 365 Security Center. In the Security Center, I mean, obviously you come into security.microsoft.com. I logged on before we started. So I can come down here into email and collaboration, which is where Microsoft Defender for Office 365 settings are. I come down to policies and rules, and I can come into threat policies. And just real quick before we jump into configuration analyzer, here's those preset security policies that I mentioned. And we've got our strict protection, which is the more restrictive, the tighter configuration. But if you do nothing, you might wind up with some more false positives, which you monitor and tune accordingly. And you see in this particular tenant of mine, Fourth Coffee, the world's only virtual coffee shop, I have strict protection turned on. There is standard protection, which is a little bit more open, a little bit less rigid. There may be a degree of false negatives greater than normal getting in, so we can tune it from that way. And then we also have built-in protection, which is a baseline protection for all mailboxes, even those that you haven't licensed with the full Microsoft Defender for Office 365, as long as you have Microsoft Defender for Office 365 for some of your tenants. But these are those preset policies. And if we go back and we look at the configuration analyzer is going to evaluate against either that standard policy or that strict policy. I'm going to take a minute because I just realized I'm not giving a verbal description for people who are audio only. So if we go back to starting at security.microsoft.com, on the left-hand action pane, if you come down to email and collaboration, under email and collaboration, if you come down to policies and rules, which is where you would set your threat policies, your alert policies, manage your alerts. Under threat policies, you have the configuration analyzer. And when you click on the configuration analyzer, it gives you a view of what configuration analyzer evaluates against, on the first tab, the standard recommendations. On the second tab, you can see how it compares against the strict recommendation. And then you also have the ability to look at a configuration drift, which can analyze changes over time and also show you the history of settings that were made. That's very useful if you are either interested in seeing what somebody did before you got there, or if you have strict change control requirements and you want to go back and look to make sure that everything that was done lines up with your change control policies. We want to look at the standard recommendations first. So if we evaluate our current configuration against the standard recommendations, we can see that there are recommendations around anti-spam, anti-phishing, anti-malware, and safe attachments. And then we can see a list of what all of those are. Now, you can have many, many policies within Microsoft Defender or for Office 365. I have more policies in this tenant than I recommend you should have. Truly, you should have one policy that is consistent across all of your users, maybe one policy for testing. But if you're trying to manage by exception, or you have multiple policies, and what happens if an attacker targets a large number of your users? Why did some people get this, some people didn't? It's really better to have one consistent policy. But as I have multiple policies in this tenant, I can see each of the policies that was listed, and you should see most of them are called some kind of test policy. The group setting, where it comes in, what the current configuration is, when it was last modified. And I can look at any of these and see what we might do with that. So in this first line where it says quarantine message, I have a policy called test2 for domain. The policy setting name is high confidence spam detection action. So in the standard recommendation, the current configuration is set to move to junk email folder. And if I want to apply the recommended setting, I can just hit the apply recommended setting, and that's going to instead send it to quarantine the message, and I can confirm it. I can also tell it, don't ask me again, just do what I say. If I hit OK, assuming I have the appropriate administrative rights, it would update that policy for me to go with the recommendation, which for high confidence is to send things into quarantine. I hit OK, it applies the setting. So if I want to go through and tighten things up, again, change control is outside of this discussion. Obviously, if you have change control, you need to file the appropriate documentation, get approval, wait for your change window, et cetera, et cetera. But I can go through and I can make whatever settings I want, and I can apply them, and it will just go through and it will set it for me. If I'm curious about what a particular setting is, I can hit the view policy button, and it will take me to the particular policy in question so that I can then see what the setting is, what things are on or off, so I know what the current is if I don't remember what it is before I make the change that I want to make. And I can go through on each and every line for each and every policy. And again, since here I'm evaluating against standard recommendations, it would make those settings based on the standard recommendations. Now, notice the numbers of changes. In standard, 16, 11, 1, and 1. If I move over to strict, 22, 12, 1, and 1. So there are more recommendations because, again, strict, it's cranked tighter. It's more restrictive. Again, you may have a few more false positives to deal with in your tuning, but it is more aggressive in its settings. But the same idea. If I wanted to go to strict, I could go through, I could look at each of the settings, I could make the decision. So this is a good one that's due. Quarantine retention period. Our out of the box is 15, but if we're going strict, we might have more false positives. So you may need more time to go through and review quarantine. So our recommendation is to change the retention from 15 days to 30. If I hit apply recommendation, again, it prompts me to confirm I want to make that change. It makes a change, and now my quarantine retention within that particular policy, test2 for domain, is set to 30 days.
Let me ask you a question based on that last set of comments here. Who controls this? Is it you as the security guy, or is it Edward, the collaboration guy? Because email guy.
I'm sorry. I thought you were going to.
Who runs email security now? Is it the collaboration guys that's having to deal with voice and having to deal with SharePoint and having to do Teams?
There is not one answer for you there, Edward, because it really depends upon how the organization itself runs. In probably a third of the enterprise customers that I deal with, the email team is responsible for email security. And while Microsoft Defender for Office 365 does more than email. It does instant messaging and file sharing, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams. It all falls under the email team because email is the primary attack vector. But in the rest of the customers, the larger majority, the security team is a dedicated security team, and they're not responsible for messaging. They are responsible for setting policy. In probably half of those, they are responsible for also the day-to-day operations. So there's a lot of RBAC capabilities in here. There are a number of built-in roles. Our universal RBAC that we're working on for coming out later this year will provide even more capabilities in there. The idea being that whatever your particular organizational structure and your roles and responsibilities are, if there's not today an included RBAC role that quite meets the need, you're going to have a lot more capability coming in the next few months to be able to define that exact role and who can do what.
So Ed Fisher, we have a question in the window from Dean, and he says he has standard protection turned on, but he still has some recommendations from the config analyzer. I can imagine what I think those probably are, but I would love to hear what you think they are.
So I don't have a specific thing there. If you've done standard and you've made no changes whatsoever, then things should line up pretty closely. But do check to make sure, in the policy, if there's more than one policy, are the recommendations on a different policy, especially if you've got policies applied to groups of users as opposed to taking a single policy and applying it to the domain to catch everybody. You can also look at the configuration drift analysis to see what some of those changes or where things may have drifted from your policy settings based on the baselines.
Yeah, my bet, because Ed's configuration is pretty clean compared to what I see a lot of customers have, the biggest security issue that I usually see is when it comes to like safe domains or safe users that people have, 50 people listed in as safe, right? And those people won't get scanned for phish or malware. So my bet, Dean, is it's probably something like that. But as Ed just showed us, the drift analysis is a good place to start for that, for sure.
Yeah, if you only have 50 entries in an allow list, you're probably way ahead of the curve. But please try to get that to 0. Allow lists, and so many times we see customers, again, coming from a competing product, who they had an allow list that's got years and years of entries in it, and they just want to basically copy and paste that in. Our allow list is a very blanket golden ticket kind of approach to say, I don't know why you were blocking it. I don't want to take the time to figure out why you were blocking it. Maybe you were blocking it because of something that's outside of my control, like a DKIM failure. I just want to let this message in, so let it in. And if you add things to an allow list, you bypass a lot of the protections without any kind of safeguards around it. So you can put in allow list entries for spam, and we will not check it for spam, but we will still check it for phish, and we will still check it for impersonation, and we will still check it for other aspects. Or you can go into the tenant allow block list, and if you add something to the allow list there, asterisk, there's a but coming up, then that says just let it in. Don't look at it. Don't question it. I don't care. I want you to let it in. That's gotten a lot of customers into trouble because they have added like their own domains or their own senders. It's like, wait a minute, your users' mailboxes on Office 365, something is coming from the outside world that says it's from your user. Don't you think that ought to be looked at a little bit more closely? But they'll add their own domains. They'll add Microsoft.com into their allow list. It's like, please don't ever do that. If it's being blocked, there's a reason, and let's look at that reason. Let's not give everybody a hall pass to go through. that became such a problem that we won't actually allow you to directly add things to the allow list anymore, because so many self-inflicted wounds, people shooting themselves in the foot, adding that. You can block all you want to, but if you actually want something in the allow list, you have to do an admin submission to us so we see what came in, so we can make a determination of why was this blocked? Is this really something that is safe to allow, or is this something where we need to come back and say, no, it's coming from a known hacking farm in Mordor. You really want to allow that in anyway? So the allows can be really, really risky. And even with the standard policy, the strict policy, if you've got allow entries, as Andrea called out, yeah, that could very well be the incrementing number of things, because we're going to say there should be blank. We don't want to see things there.
I'll say two things. Didn't I read somewhere that we kind of changed some rules on those tenant allow block lists back in January?
Well, so the allow submissions, they have to be an admin submission, and they are temporary. So if you submit something to us as a false positive and you say you need to allow it, we will add it to the allow list, but it's got only a 30-day period, because we're expecting that if it was indeed a false positive, we will be doing tuning, machine learning will be updated. It shouldn't be caught again in the future, so there's no need to have a persistent allow list entry. If there hasn't been enough information to build up reputation, understand, then that allow will be extended, but we don't want to see permanent entries in allow. Versus in a block, if you want to block stuff, you block it, and you can say block it for a day, 7 days, 30 days, block it until a specific date, or block it forever. And if you want to block it forever, it stays there until you remove it. The other thing, we're rolling that out starting tomorrow, is significant increases in the total number of entries there for Microsoft 365 E5 and MDO P2 customers. So don't quote me on this, but I think the limit was like 500 and 1,000, and it's going to 5,000, 10,000, or order of magnitude more entries.
Mm-hmm. We got a
we got a question in the window, Ed, from Pirate Tomsky.
Yeah, go ahead. I can't see it.
Pirate Tomsky says, is there any way to find out which anti-malware companies Microsoft partners with to scan incoming emails?
There is not, because that is internal capabilities. We include our own Defender antivirus. We include some other third-party antivirus. No, Kaspersky is not one of them. That's the most common question. But we also rotate through those. So there's not every single one of your messages will be scanned by this specific scanner, because we like to have multiple opinions and multiple rotations through. So there should be at least 3 scans for antivirus for anything that comes through. Now, of course, that's antivirus scanning. Our sandboxing technology is our own. So if it's something that passes the antivirus, but it is a file that could potentially carry executable content, a PE, a macro, anything like that, then that is detonated in virtual machines that are ours, not third party. And we are evaluating what behaviors are there. Is it trying to read a memory space? Is it trying to open an outbound connection? Is it trying to do a file drop or modification, something like that?
And so with the, why is email still one of the more prevalent ways of infiltration into an organization? Is it technology sufficient, or we're not training our end users well enough?
Mostly it comes down to the end user. I mean, when you think about how a company internally communicates, sure, if they are in an office, they physically walk up and talk to one another, or they may use whatever instant messaging, whether that's Teams or Slack or something else. But for external communications, email is far and away the dominant way people collaborate with folks outside of their organization. There have been some companies that have tried to do away with email. some significant names that you can go Bing and look up for if you don't know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to shame anybody. Those approaches have failed miserably because no matter what kind of chat you may have in your website, your customer support website, or what kind of IM usage you've got, email is universal and it is asynchronous and it is global, and people send and receive emails. Probably it depends upon whose statistics you read, but on the low end 90 and on the higher end 96% of all attacks start with email. And the reason is people trust. It's human nature to trust. It's human nature to think they recognize something and act upon the assumption that it's who they think it is. And that's why email hygiene is so important. But the preventative is an arms race, and it is always reactive, because no matter what an attacker comes up with, as soon as we or Cisco or Proofpoint or Symantec or anybody else recognizes it, categorizes it, comes up with a way to block it so it doesn't get there anymore, and whether that happens in seconds with machine learning because we're seeing 36 billion messages an hour, or it takes days and an analyst to look through and evaluate it, it is reactive, and the attackers move on to try something else new. It's always going to be that way. And again, that's across the industry. That's not any one product. We are all reactive.
And
but
go ahead.
If an email gets to that end user, it is that end user who is your last line of defense. Are they going to click it or not? If they click it and they get taken to a page that asks them for their credentials, are they going to enter it or not? There's the entire second half of Microsoft Defender for Office 365 is that user resilience, that attack simulation training. And if you are using Cofense or Wombat or FishMe or KnowBe4 or any of those third-party products, then you're familiar with the idea of trying to fool your users to see if they're paying attention or not. Our attack simulation training is built into the product. It does that across all of the vectors, whether it's email or IM or file sharing, credentials, rewards. I mean, there are 200 and some odd different templates in there, plus you can add your own. But we also then have content from Terranova and from the SANS Institute to help train users on what did you fall for, what should you have looked for, why should you have not clicked on this. That includes tracking of that efficacy, so you can ensure that that last line of defense is getting better, getting smarter, learning to recognize things. And you really have to empower your users to make the right choices, because there is no 100% perfect. Something's going to get into their inbox, no matter what product, no matter what vendor. If you're stacking vendors, you've got to make sure that your users are empowered with the knowledge to know what to look for.
Well, you could train your users till they blue in the face. If they're here in the South, they're going to fall for that free Chick-fil-A sandwich email. They're going to ask for it. I've gotten more emails through when you promise them a Chick-fil-A biscuit or a cookie, they will click on it.
You promised me a Chick-fil-A sandwich to be here today, and I still haven't gotten the food. So, yeah, you're right. We'll fall for it.
Well, I will say, I think they've proven that there are some people who are just going to click. You're never going to get rid of the clickers. I mean, you might shrink them down, but there are some people who are going to click. And so I think you're right. And I think we have to do our best to train the ones that we can. But if we are relying on our end users to keep us secure, then I don't think we've done our job as security people.
Well, and if it is an end user and they are going to click, well, if it's malware, that's what endpoint protection is for, EDR capabilities. But typically it's credentials. And that's why you want to go into something that is more theft resilient, using multi-factor authentication, moving towards some kind of passwordless. I mean, we at Microsoft, I literally don't think I've typed in a password this year. I've got a number of different ways I can authenticate. I've got the Authenticator app on my phone. I have a series of YubiKeys, depending upon which system I'm trying to go into. Yes, that's in my office at home, so reasonably secure, but each of those keys requires a PIN. So even if somebody fooled me into going to a site and typing in my username, and if I actually remembered what my password was, that's not going to get them into anything, because there's going to be an MFA prompt, or it's going to be a system that requires a physical OAuth token, again, YubiKey, but there are others that are out there. So we don't want to rely upon any one thing. User resilience is critical, but yes, users are going to make mistakes, especially when it comes to Chick-fil-A sandwiches. But if then a multi-factor prompts them, or a conditional access policy says, wait, you logged on in Charlotte, North Carolina 10 minutes ago. Now I'm seeing a log on from Elbonia. That's not likely. So Impossible Travel, let's not allow that in, or let's look at it closer. Things like that, getting to the point where even if a user is convinced to go to a phishing page, anything they might type into that form that looks like the corporate logon won't be useful to the attacker.
Yeah. It's I don't say cat and mouse, but that gives the impression that the mouse is at a disadvantage. That's not necessarily true, Tom and Jerry. But it is education.
The mouse has to survive every time. The cat only has to win once.
That's a way of looking at it. Unless the mouse has brothers. And they come to avenge their kinfolk. Well, you started the show, Ed, about talking about one of your features that you like the most, which is the configuration analyzer. As we get ready to end the show, give me your number 2. What's your second thing that somebody say, hey, if you don't have this turned on, configure, or using it in MDO, you're wrong. Don't be wrong. Be right.
So probably turning on the global settings for Teams and SharePoint and OneDrive. I mean, if you look at the other players in the messaging, filtering, messaging, hygiene environment, they are all external. You can point the MX record to them and then have them relay to us, so they're in the mail flow from internet in. You can send messages out through them. So, you're covering the north-south and you're covering the south-north, but they're external to the system. So they will never be pre-delivery for intra-org, for the east-west channel. You may use a journaling rule to copy messages out to them. They may be an API-based vendor that has a service account that can connect to mailboxes and look at the content inside the mailboxes. But then it's a race because it's already in the user's inbox and the user may be clicking on it or not. But even with all of that, the one thing they just cannot do is the Teams and the OneDrive and the SharePoint capabilities. And those are checkboxes to turn on. So we can look at an instant message, and if there's a link in the instant message, we can check that just as we would if it was a link in an email. If there's a file that's being shared in OneDrive or SharePoint or dragged and dropped into a Teams conversation, we can detonate those files just as if they were coming in an email. And no other product out there can do that because they don't have the hooks into it. So enabling the protections for Teams and SharePoint and OneDrive are critical, but also considering the pre versus post, because we are always looking at things before it hits the inbox. The third parties, for north-south, MX record says, yeah, they can look at it before it gets to us. But that east-west channel, they're only going to be able to do it after the fact. And if a message comes in at 2 o'clock in the morning, odds are, Edward, you're not going to be awake to click on it. Post-delivery is going to get it before you get up in the morning and check your email. But if the same thing sent to you at 10 o'clock in the morning, it's a race to see, are they going to check it and get it out before you've noticed you've got a new email message and clicked on it. So that pre versus post delivery is a big distinguishing feature, but enabling Teams, OneDrive, and SharePoint are the things that tick the boxes, turn it on.
Well, and super informative, because I think sometimes people take email, sanitation, hygiene, security for granted. I don't know if that's
new shiny.
And I'm going to close the show with the new shiny. how is this Copilot affecting how you go about your business? Because we got 5 Copilots, and one of them's M365 or so.
We have a number of Copilots with more coming out. How has it affected me? It has not yet. That's back in a few weeks.
Somebody's seen something. But I am keeping an eye on the new shiny, which is all the AI hype, the ML love, and I'm liking to see how where it could be truly effective is the egress and ingress, which is email, right? And I want to see how it applies to that rather than being used when there's a high probability of an actual threat through other means. Because if you can use that to fortify, like you said, email, that's the easiest way in, right?
Watch this space for more.
I'll watch the space for more.
Happy to come back and talk about that when I can.
All right. Well, Mr. Fisher, I'm gonna share a joke as we close out the show, unless there's anything else. So I reach out to Ed and I say, hey, you want to come on my podcast? And he was like, why? I said, because I asked you to. I want you to come to the show. You literally said that. And I said, plus you're buddies with one of my good buddies. Doesn't that give me a little credibility? And he's like, sure, I'll come on. Yeah, I'll do it. But thanks for coming on.
Thanks for
and if there's some major breaking news out there, feel free to reach out to one of us and we can see about getting you on to talk about it. There seems to be something every day these days, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, thanks everyone, supporters, partners, listeners, hecklers for joining us today, the last day of the month. Looking forward as we steam into June with some more guests that are coming on. And as always, you have a question, you can reach out to Andrea, myself, Roderick, and or Brody on Discord or whatever means you reach out to us. We're good to go.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
As Wiedersehen.